This podcast is brought to you by Knowledge at Wharton.
We know how important the home building industry is right now in America. The industry obviously was a vital part in the rebuild from the recession, but what about bringing that mindset to other countries? A pair of Wharton School graduates are doing just that in West Africa. Bob Hornsby and Amit Dhillon are graduates in the class of 2000, and they are working in a partnership to bring more housing, I should say, to the African continent. Bob is the Chief Financial Officer of American Home Builders of West Africa. He joins me here in the studio right now. And joining us on the phone is Amit, who is Managing Director of U.S. Africa Housing Finance, which works with Bob's company on this project. Bob, nice meeting you. Thank you for coming in.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Amit, great having you with us on the phone.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. My pleasure.
Thank you. So I guess give us the backstory on how you got started with this. Part of it does tie back to your time here at Wharton, but what areas of West Africa are we really looking at?
So our business is now in Guinea, Conakry, and we're looking to expand this year into a couple of other countries. But this project actually goes back years before my time at business school. My business partner, Jonathan, and I were Peace Corps volunteers in Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, 93 to 95. And it was there that we first sort of noticed a problem in the housing market there, and it was mostly Jonathan that sort of zeroed in on this, that wherever you go in that part of the world, you'll often see houses in varying stages of completion.
Yeah.
And they never seem to get done. You watch it for a year, watch it for 2 years, 3 years, and they rarely get finished, or if they do get finished, it's taken so much time that you can just sort of count the material wastage as they go through several rainy seasons before they even get a roof on them. So Jonathan and I stayed in touch over the years. He went to business school at INSEAD and did a business plan related to housing in West Africa, and then we got our heads together and sort of had a meeting of the minds late 2013, early 2014 about how we would design a way to improve the way houses are built in that part of the world, and so that we could deliver something higher quality, faster, and do it in a production method, so that you get the efficiencies of building neighborhoods, several houses at a time instead of just one-offs here and there, which is the way it's typically done in that part of the world.
And so reaching out to Amit's organization was part of that process to take those next steps.
Well, as with a lot of business in that part of the world, in some ways, when you decide to work in sub-Saharan Africa, you are in some ways signing up to build your own infrastructure, because a lot of what typically needs to happen for business to work doesn't exist there, or doesn't exist in the format that makes it possible to do it the way we do here. You opened the show talking about how important the housing sector has been in the United States. After World War II, the U.S. government created a way to support banks who would lend to homeowners, and that's really the beginning of the housing market explosion here. Go to a place like sub-Saharan Africa, most places don't even have a functioning mortgage industry.
Yeah.
So from the very beginning, we realized that while we had a good product solution from the housing standpoint and a service solution in terms of being able to give West Africans a reliable partner to actually get this work done in a professional manner, what was missing was the financing piece. And when this is where you get into that build your own infrastructure. We decided that nobody else was going to do it, so we needed to do it. Amit was an investor in American Home Builders of West Africa, was keen to work with us to help find a solution to this, and that's what U.S. Africa Housing Finance grew out of, was realizing that particularly for members of the West African diaspora who may be living in Europe or Canada or the U.S. or Australia, there's no banks here that are going to lend to them to build a home in West Africa, and the industry over there just can't support it.
Which, I mean, laying out what Bob just mentioned, that tells me that the housing market in this part of the world is significantly needing at this point, not only just in the buildings themselves, but in the processes that we consider to be traditional in our housing market here in the United States.
Absolutely. I think there's an old saying, Dan, necessity is the mother of invention. And that's really the case here, where in order for American home builders to succeed, there had to be a viable mechanism to provide some sort of financing for these houses. And that just didn't exist. It doesn't exist in Africa itself, in Guinea or really any other country out there. And no U.S. bank was going to lend for houses built in West Africa. So we essentially had to build it ourselves, which is why we created U.S. Africa Housing Finance, which I of course run now.
Well, what is the state of the housing market, housing sector in that part of the world right now?
So I'll let Bob comment on the housing sector. Yeah. I handle really the finance part of it, and from that perspective, I think it's fair to say there is no mortgage or home lending market to speak of. Yeah. Certainly in Guinea where we operate, and so as a result, they had to work. They, being American home builders, had to work very hard to create the housing and the infrastructure and the marketing and all that sort of stuff. But it became abundantly clear that they could build the best houses in the world, but if you didn't have some mechanism to finance it, because people obviously don't have 100% cash to pay for the houses, that you weren't going to be able to sell those houses, and so that's really where we had to develop U.S. Africa Housing Finance, and it's essentially at its heart actually not all that complicated a scheme, in the sense that it's really taking private equity or private investor money in, largely here in the United States, and then using that to finance houses. I mean, obviously, there's an underwriting process that we have to go through to make sure we're lending appropriately, and then just taking the proceeds from those finance contracts that we originate, and then giving those out to investors. Which
gets to the one of the words I used earlier in the show is trust. Right. And that ends up, Bob, being a very important component here, because as you laid out, there are stories that you have written about that I had a chance to take a look at it recently, that, as you said, money may be sent to this part of the world to build these homes, yet they're not being completed, they're not being finished off, and that money is going somewhere for some other venture, right, which erodes that trust.
That's right. That's right. I mean, there are, by some measures, as much as $25 billion in remittances that go back into West Africa every year from West Africans living outside of West Africa who are, have left home to kind of earn their fortune abroad. And much of that money is targeted at real estate projects. People, for many people in the diaspora, the one core dream is to be able to go back to your home country, have a nice home to retire to, and to let your community know, I did it. It was worth it. I made these sacrifices, but now I've come back. I've invested in my country. I've created something beautiful. I've created wealth. I've created employment opportunities for all the people involved in building this home. Yeah. And we hear stories time and time again of people who have sent money over to a trusted relative or a trusted friend. It could be an uncle. It could be a brother-in-law. And it almost always ends in heartbreak, either because the person has simply lied to them, has been over the years, will send them pictures and say, the walls are going up, the roof is going up. They don't want to travel over there too often, because every trip you take to try to supervise construction is that much less money you can invest in the house you're trying to build. Sure. So they may wait 5 years or more, 10 years to go look at a finished product and get there and find nothing. That's sort of the worst case scenario. And there are other bad case scenarios in the interim, because if you can find somebody you can trust with your money, the chances of that person also being expert at clearing title to a piece of land, at managing a construction project, managing and supervising subcontractors on a site, those are all professional skills that require a complicated set of knowledge and skills that not everybody has. And so even the people who get something built are often disappointed with the quality and with how long it takes. So what we're doing is essentially taking a production home building process and implementing it there, and giving buyers in the diaspora an entity here in the U.S. that they can interface with. They can contact us anytime they want. They can see daily pictures from the construction site through our project management tool that our guys in the field use to keep the clients up to date on what's going on. So it gives them a way to know that their money is going towards what they intended, and not to just sort of exist in this zone of not knowing and crossing their fingers and hoping that something's going to happen.
So the building that is being done, and I'll get into how much you've done in just a second, but the building is being done most often for who? That, in terms of the economic scale
Sure.
Of the people that live in that part of the world.
For us right now, almost all of our clients are West Africans living outside of West Africa,
right.
Who have been saving up money to build a home back in their home country.
Right.
We sell homes ranging in price, end user price, from $32,000 for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath twin, essentially.
Yeah.
Up to $200,000 or more for a very large villa.
Right.
Most of our sales are happening in the $55,000 to $75,000 range,
right.
which is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath villa or a 4-bedroom, 3-bath twin row home
right.
style home. We would love to be doing more work for the middle income part of the market in that
Sure.
part of the world,
yeah.
the lower income part of the market in that part of the world. To do that, you really have to have a local government that's committed not only to making land available and supporting foreign investors who want to come in and service that part of the market,
right.
but also you have to have a government that's credibly committed to dealing with the housing finance issue. Because if you can't offer somebody financing terms over 15, 20, 25, 30 years at an interest rate that's reasonable,
right.
It really doesn't. It almost doesn't matter how inexpensive you make the house. The earning power in that part of the world is such that you can't make it work without some sort of commitment to financing over the long term.
It sounds like, Amit, that to a degree, from the finance side of things, in many cases, the conversations that Bob just laid out are truly foreign. They don't even occur between financial elements and governments.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I'll point out a few things. So, one I'll mention is that, we typically are able to finance about 70% of the cost. So the buyer typically comes up with about 30% down, and we finance the rest. The other thing, the way Bob laid out the way it was traditionally done, which is all absolutely correct. One thing I'll point out there is because there, traditionally wasn't any financing available, these houses that Bob described that are built over 5 years or 10 years or whatever the period of time may be, you can imagine they were built very piecemeal because they were built as
Sure.
and when the person here had money. So maybe they have $2,000 this year, $3,000 next year, and so you get this house sort of built piecemeal over time. And essentially, what we're doing is from a finance perspective is we're taking these, I'll call them best practices from the U.S. and other parts of the world and trying to apply them there. And you're absolutely right. These are concepts that, really just don't exist in country. And so there's a lot of, I'll call it education or really just getting people up to speed, certainly on the finance side, but even, and Bob can talk to this, even on the housing side in terms of expectations of, quality of a home or how quickly it'll be built, or what the process is to get the keys to it. All those sorts of things. And for me personally, that's one of the things that I find very fascinating here. These things that we sort of take for granted, living in the United States, in terms of, I just walk down to Bank of America, I get a mortgage, and off I go.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works there. And so, in some sense, we're having to, you could say, reinvent the wheel, but it's actually a lot of fun to try and reinvent the wheel in this case.
So how realistic do you think is it right now? And maybe, you have a time frame in mind of being able to have these type of significant conversations with government entities in this part of the world, whether it be nationally, whether it be regionally within a country? How realistic is it right now?
It is realistic. We are engaged in discussions with the government of Guinea and have looked at the government programs in some of the other countries in the region. Some are further along than others.
Yeah.
Senegal actually has a housing bank. that has branches in Columbus, Ohio, and New York and Philadelphia. So they have done some work to be able to reach out to members of the Senegalese diaspora that are spread out around the world and create support buyer financing for some projects there. Yeah. So there are some countries that are moving in an encouraging direction. There are other places where there's a lot of work to be done. The problem for people who want to build in that part of the world often starts with land title because. Unlike here, where you have this, you buy a house, you get a mortgage, there's a little line in there somewhere about your title insurance, and it all just kind of gets absorbed in. Yeah. And title insurance is just a money printing machine here, right? Because everybody pays it. And
we don't know what it's really for.
Nobody ever collects because
exactly.
You can verify title so easily here. In that part of the world, we as a builder and all builders essentially have to self-insure by doing the legwork and doing the homework. It all depends on the local administrative infrastructure. In Guinea, it follows the sort of French system of préfecture and sous-préfecture and minister level verification. So we go at the sous-préfecture, which is like the county level, verify that nobody else has a claim to any land before we buy it. Do it at the prefecture, which is like the state level. Yeah. Do it up at the national ministry, and then we go around to the community members there to make sure that there's no traditional land claim from sort of tribal history that would cause a problem with building on this land. Now, there are some governments that are that are taking steps to protect title claims, legitimate title claims, in a way that makes it easier for foreign investors to come in and do the kind of thing that we're doing.
Right.
There are other countries that kind of look the other way when someone has a legitimate title claim and a squatter comes in and starts building on it. And so that's what we look at when we look at expanding is where can we find a government who's really committed to supporting legitimate title claim, really committed to supporting initiatives for financing buyers,
right.
And where there's also some sort of international player who's going to help fill in some pieces of the puzzle, and people are doing this. I mean, we've talked to. There's a fund that was set up by the Dutch Development Bank that's set up to be a local currency bond fund that would make financing available in different parts of West Africa using local currency. And when you have those sort of multilateral development institutions that are stepping up to put some financing muscle behind initiatives like that, then your options start to open up. But you really have to have all of these pieces of the puzzle fit together, from protecting a legitimate land title to protecting foreign investors from shakedowns and that kind of stuff. So.
Bob Hornsby joining me in studio, Chief Financial Officer for American Home Builders of West Africa. Amit Dhillon joining us on the phone, Managing Director of U.S. Africa Housing Finance. Your comments welcome at 844-WHARTON, 844-942-7866. Or if you can't get to your phone, send us a comment via Twitter at BizRadio111, BIZRadio111, or my Twitter account, which is at DanLoney21. So as you've started to build these out for people that eventually want to go home and retire there, how much has the build out of some of these homes maybe started to lay that groundwork for the trust that we talk about so much and those conversations that you need to have moving down the road?
It has made a big difference. I mean, we have realized that getting somebody into a home is what cracks open wide the door to growth for our business, because word of mouth in the West African diaspora community is a really powerful tool. Mm-hmm. And 3 years ago, we would call people who on our lead list, and half of them assumed that we were some kind of scam just because they've seen so many people scammed.
Yeah.
Now we get inbound calls that people are saying, my sister-in-law bought a house with you, or my cousin knows somebody that bought a house with you, and it's where have you been all my life? Is basically, and that's once people know that this is possible, that there is somebody that you can trust to do it, there's the floodgates really begin to open up, and we've seen that over the course of the past year and a half. Just the sales volume just completely took off.
I would think, Amit, with having this type of idea and bringing it forward, the economic benefits for the region, obviously having these properties there and the build out that you will see in the future, gives great hope for the economies of some of these areas moving forward. And at the same time, what could have been, with all of this money, as Bob laid out, over the last 10 years, 20 years, what could have been the economic benefit for these lands in the past that has been lost because of this?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, we haven't really talked about it. Obviously we run this as a for-profit business, but there's really a social impact angle to this as well.
Yeah.
Which we obviously take very seriously. Take U.S. Africa Housing Finance. When I talk to investors, here in the U.S. to invest in the fund, I lead with the fact that it's got a very respectable U.S. dollar denominated 9% return, which should be reason enough to want to invest. But beyond that, as you point out, we're really helping that part of the world to not only adopt sort of, I'll call them Western standards in terms of borrowing and so forth, but employment. I don't think Bob's mentioned this, but all the houses that are built there in right now in Guinea are all done with local labor. Right? So these are independent contractors that are building these houses, and obviously American Home Builders has got employees on the ground there, who are paid, and then beyond that, as we all know, as you start to build infrastructure, or you build essentially a subdivision, what we're building there, then you've got businesses that pop up around that.
Sure.
And so you've got this sort of secondary effect. And this is, what we believe is really, really powerful just in terms of propelling, the business model forward and really getting the local governments to understand that, hey, we're here to have a profitable business, but at the same time, we're doing something very positive for the local community and really for the country as a whole. And, we started small. We're still just in one country, but we can really see that expanding very rapidly to neighboring countries and taking the finance aspect and the building aspect and really moving them forward.
As you have talked to potential investors in this fund moving forward, have they also at first had a reaction of either concern or wanting to just, get a fuller understanding of what's going on, kind of what like Bob laid out in terms of the concerns of people in that part of the world with, so much, faulty and shady business occurring?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I tend to get sort of one of two reactions, and this, probably a little bit too discreet, but you'll get people that the moment I mention the word Africa, and this is somehow related to Africa, they just sort of shut down and say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Right.
And then you'll get folks, tend to be the more adventurous ones, which I think you probably throw Bob and myself into that category, who look at this and go, that's interesting. Let me understand a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
What I've found is if you get somebody to spend 15, 20 minutes with me and let me lay out sort of what this investment is all about and how we're going about financing these houses and the underwriting criteria and so forth that we're using, then people, their eyes start to open up and they go, wow, okay, this is actually quite interesting. And, you get, the standard questions, hey, are there currency risks? No, it's actually all dollar denominated. You sort of tick through all the standard things that an investor would start to look at from a risk perspective. And people quickly come to the realization that, wow, this isn't anywhere near as risky as we thought, because, we've been very careful in terms of how we underwrite these loans, right? As I mentioned earlier, we require a 30% down.
Right, exactly.
So think to yourself, if you've put 30% down on something, you're not going to default very easily.
Right.
Amit, you're going to really be careful.
Amit, thanks very much for joining the show. Greatly appreciate your time. Bob, thanks for coming on as well.
Thanks for having me.
Talking to you again.
For more insight from Knowledge at Wharton, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.